I had a nightmare the night of Mom and Dad's funeral. I'd had nightmares and wild dreams every once in a while when I was little, but nothing like this one. I woke up screaming bloody murder, and I never could remember what it was that had scared me. It scared Soda Pop and Derry almost as bad as it scared me. For night after night, for weeks on end, I would dream this dream and wake up in a cold sweat or screaming, and I never could remember exactly what happened in it. Soda began sleeping with me, and it stopped reoccurring so often, but it happened often enough for Derry to take me to a doctor. The doctor said I had too much imagination. He had a simple cure, too. Study harder, read more, draw more, and play football more. After a hard game of football and 4 or 5 hours of reading, I was too exhausted mentally and physically to dream anything. But Derry never got over it, and every once in a while he would ask me if I ever dreamed anymore. Was it very bad? Two-Bit questioned. He knew the whole story, and having never dreamed about anything but blondes, he was interested. No, I lied. I had awakened in a cold sweat and shivering, but Soda was dead to the world. I had just wiggled closer to him and stayed awake for a couple of hours trembling under his arm. That dream always scared the heck out of me. Derry started to say something, but before he could begin, Soda Pop and Steve came in. You know what? Soda Pop said to no one in particular. When we stomp the Sochies good, me and Steve here are going to throw a big party and everybody can get stoned. Then we'll go chase the Sochies clear to Mexico. Where are you going to get the dough, little man? Derry had found the cake and was handing out pieces. I'll think of something, Soda Pop assured him between bites. You going to take Sandy to the party, I asked, just to be saying something. Instant silence. I looked around. What's the deal? Soda Pop was staring at his feet, but his ears were reddened. No. She went to live with her grandmother in Florida. How come? Look, Steve said, surprisingly angry. Does he have to draw you a picture? It was either that or getting married, and her parents almost hit the roof at the idea of her marrying a 16-year-old kid. 17, Soda said softly. I'll be 17 in a couple of weeks. Oh, I said, embarrassed. Soda was no innocent. I had been in on bowl sessions, and his bragging was as loud as anyone's, but never about Sandy. Not ever about Sandy. I remembered how her blue eyes had glowed when she looked at him, and I was sorry for her. There was a heavy silence. Then Derry said, "We'd better get on to work, Pepsi-Cola." Derry rarely called Soda by Dad's pet nickname for him, but he did so then because he knew how miserable Soda Pop was about Sandy. I hate to leave you here by yourself, Pony Boy, Derry said slowly. Maybe I ought to take the day off. I've stayed by my lonesome before. You can't afford a day off. Yeah, but you just got back, and I really ought to stay. I'll babysit him, Two-Bit said, ducking as I took a swing at him. I haven't got anything better to do. Why don't you get a job? Steve said. Ever consider working for a living? Work? Two-Bit was aghast. And ruin my rep? I wouldn't be babysitting the kid here if I knew of some good day nursery opening on Saturdays. I pulled his chair out over backward and jumped on him, but he had me down in a second. I was kind of short on wind. I got to cut out smoking or I won't make track next year. Holler, Uncle. No, I said, struggling, but I didn't have my usual strength. Derry was pulling on his jacket. You two do up the dishes. You can go to the movies if you want to before you go see Dally and Johnny. He paused for a second, watching Two-Bit squash the heck out of me. Two-Bit, lay off. You ain't looking so good. Pony Boy, you take a couple aspirin and go easy. You smoke more than a pack today and I'll skin you, understood? Yeah, I said, getting to my feet. You carry more than one bundle of roofing at a time today and me and Soda'll skin you, understood? He grinned one of his rare grins. Yeah. See y'all this afternoon. Bye, I said. I overheard our Ford's vroom and thought, Soda's driving. And they left. Anyway, I was walking around downtown and started to take the shortcut through an alley. Two-Bit was telling me about one of his many exploits while we did the dishes. While I did the dishes. He was sitting on the cabinet, sharpening that black-handled switchblade he was so proud of. And I ran into 3 guys. I says, howdy, and they just look at each other. Then one says, we would jump you, but since you're as slick as us, we figured you don't have nothing worth taking. And I says, buddy, that's the truth, and went right on. Moral? What's the safest thing to be when one is met by a gang of social outcasts in an alley? A judo expert, I suggested. No, another social outcast. Two-Bit yelped and nearly fell off the cabinet from laughing so hard. I had to grin, too. He saw things straight and made them into something funny. We're going to clean up the house, I said. The reporters or police or somebody might come by. And anyway, it's time for those guys from the state to come by and check up on us. This house ain't messy. You ought to see my house. I have. And if you had the sense of a billy goat, you'd try to help around your place instead of bumming around ours. Shoot, kid, if I ever did that, my mom would die of a shock. I liked Two-Bit's mother. She had the same good humor and easygoing ways he did. She wasn't lazy like him, but she let him get away with murder. I don't know, though. It's just about impossible to get mad at him. When we had finished, I pulled on Dally's brown leather jacket. The back was burned black, and we started for 10th Street. I would drive us, Two-Bit said as we walked up the street trying to thumb a ride, but the brakes are out on my car. Almost killed me and Kathy the other night. He flipped the collar of his black leather jacket up to serve as a windbreak while he lit a cigarette. You ought to see Kathy's brother. Now there's a hood. He's so greasy he glides when he walks. He goes to the barber for an oil change, not a haircut. I would have laughed, but I had a terrific headache. We stopped at the Tasty Freeze to buy Cokes and rest up, and the blue Mustang that had been trailing us for 8 blocks pulled in. I almost decided to run, and Two-Bit must have guessed this, for he shook his head ever so slightly and tossed me a cigarette. As I lit up, the Socials who had jumped Johnny and me at the park hopped out of the Mustang. I recognized Randy Adderson, Marcia's boyfriend, and the tall guy that almost drowned me. I hated them. It was their fault Bob was dead, their fault Johnny was dying, their fault Soda and I might get put in a boys' home. I hated them as bitterly and as contemptuously as Dallas Winston hated. Two-Bit put an elbow on my shoulder and leaned against me, dragging on a cigarette. You know the rules. No jazz before the rumble, he said to the Socials. We know, Randy said. He looked at me. Come here. I want to talk to you. I glanced at Two-Bit. He shrugged. I followed Randy over to his car out of earshot of the rest. We sat there in his car for a second silent. Golly, that was the toughest car I've ever been in. I read about you in the paper, Randy said finally. How come? I don't know. Maybe I felt like playing a hero. I wouldn't have. I would have let those kids burn to death. You might not have. You might have done the same thing. Randy pulled out a cigarette and pressed in the car lighter. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. I would never have believed a greaser could pull something like that. Greaser didn't have anything to do with it. My buddy over there wouldn't have done it. Maybe you would have done the same thing. Maybe a friend of yours wouldn't have. It's the individual. I'm not going to show at the Rumble tonight, Randy said slowly. I took a good look at him. He was 17 or so, but he was already so old. Like Dallas was old. Cherry had said her friends were too cool to feel anything, and yet she could remember watching sunsets. Randy was supposed to be too cool to feel anything, and yet there was pain in his eyes. I'm sick of all this. Sick and tired. Bob was a good guy. He was the best buddy a guy ever had. I mean, he was a good fighter and tough and everything, but he was a real person too, you dig? I nodded. He's dead. His mother's had a nervous breakdown. They spoiled him rotten. I mean, most parents would be proud of a kid like that, good looking and smart and everything, but they gave in to him all the time. He kept trying to make someone say no. And they never did. They never did. That's what he wanted. For somebody to tell him no. To have somebody lay down the law. Set the limits. Give him something solid to stand on. That's what we all want, really. One time, Randy tried to grin, but I could tell he was close to tears. One time he came home drunker than anything. He thought sure they were going to raise the roof. You know what they did? They thought it was something they'd done. They thought it was their fault. That they'd failed him and driven him to it or something. They took all the blame and didn't do anything to him. If his old man had just belted him just once, he might still be alive. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Couldn't tell anyone else. My friends, they'd think I was off my rocker or turning soft. Maybe I am. I just know that I'm sick of this whole mess. That kid, your buddy, the one that got burned, he might die? Yeah, I said, trying not to think about Johnny. And tonight, people get hurt in rumbles, maybe killed. I'm sick of it because it doesn't do any good. You can't win. You know that, don't you? And when I remained silent, he went on, you can't win, even if you whip us. You'll still be where you were before at the bottom, and we'll still be the lucky ones with all the breaks. So it doesn't do any good, the fighting and the killing. It doesn't prove a thing. We'll forget it if you win or if you don't. Greasers will still be greasers, and socials will still be socials, and sometimes I think it's the ones in the middle that are really lucky. Stiffs. took a deep breath. So I'd fight if I thought it'd do any good. I think I'm going to leave town. Take my little old Mustang and all the dough I can carry and get out. Running away won't help. Hell, I know that. Randy half sobbed. But what can I do? I'm marked chicken if I punk out at the Rumble, and I'd hate myself if I didn't. I don't know what to do. I'd help if I could, I said. And I remembered Cherry Valance's voice. Things are rough all over. I knew then what she meant. He looked at me. No, you wouldn't. I'm a soc. You get a little money and the whole world hates you. No, I said. You hate the whole world. He just looked at me. From the way he looked, he could have been 10 years older than he was. I got out of the car. You would have saved those kids if you'd been there, I said. You'd have saved them the same as we did. Thanks, Grease, he said, trying to grin. Then he stopped. I didn't mean that. I meant, thanks, kid. My name's Ponyboy, I said. Nice talking to you, Randy. I walked over to Two-Bit, and Randy honked for his friends to come and get into the car. What'd he want? Two-Bit asked. What'd Mr. Super Soc have to say? He ain't a Soc, I said. He's just a guy. Just wanted to talk. You want to see a movie before we go see Johnny in Dallas? Nope, I said, lighting up another weed. I still had a headache, but I felt better. Socs were just guys after all. Things were rough all over, but it was better that way. That way, you could tell, the other guy was human too.